Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I've been reading a bit of Julius Evola recently, brushing up on it a bit. I've read him for many years, but hadn't read him for a while, and one thing really struck me in his writing. If you haven't read it before, he has the notion of the solar and lunar energy, which corresponds to a lot of my thought and work as well. Briefly articulated, the solar is the masculine force, often seen as divine, transcendent, and the lunar is the feminine, more chaotic and earthly. In modern language, we could say that corresponds to something like Mother Earth and Father Spirit. If you've watched my videos a lot, you'll know I believe that men need to be spiritually and initiated in a masculine context too. That makes them who they are. Without that process, your soul is left wondering. You might be capable of incredible things, but they're going to be relatively meaningless. And this really relates to something I was contemplating in this regard, with regard to fighters. Now, I'm a big fan of the combat sports. Oddly enough, the more spiritual, quote unquote, I've become, I think all people are spiritual, really. It's like saying a fish calls itself watery, but properly understood, I think we're part of the spirit. But the more I've become aware of this dimension of life, the more I've respected the combat sports. And that's obviously not common in, the average mainstream spiritual disciplines, because they're very feminized. Evola would say they're of a lunar capacity. They're very feminine, soft. It would see violence as even evil or egoic. Evola is very good on this, though. He awakens something which I think is very true about the divine heroic path that we've very much forgotten in this day and age. And one reason why I'm increasingly fond of combat sports especially, there are others I think that speak to it as well, rugby can be quite good, is that you do get flashes of that divine heroism coursing through. And I think, you can probably see that in all sports still, but it's very rare, especially modern football, soccer, for any American viewers. It's become almost a bit of a joke, people rolling around on the floor. It's all about money, advertising breaks all the time. And on top of that, I think the fan is taken away from the game increasingly as well. So it really is just an entertainment now, quote unquote. You may as well watch, what's it called, World Wrestling Federation? I forget the one with Undertaker and Kane and all that. It doesn't feel real, is what I'm saying. And one thing about combat sports that always appeals to me is it's so real, I remember shortly after, having a bit of a spiritual awakening around the age of 30 and watching the UFC and just being amazed, thinking, wow, these guys are so raw and courageous and really respecting it, thinking I've got to get in the gym, and bulk up and learn a bit about this and learn about the disciplines and all that. And again, I think what spoke to me through it, and I think speaks to many men, is the warrior initiation that's there and involved. But it's not quite as simple as, the combat sports maintaining that tradition. Again, if we are to return to Evola, and if you do take his view on things, we're just living in an era where we are detached from true spiritual transcendence. He called it the Kali Yuga. Well, he didn't call it that. It's a Hindu terminology, which means an age of darkness, materialism, and so on. And he was very much of that tradition that thought man at the moment is almost descended into his mortal sense of being, the small self, the body, the mind. And this is why we get confused and chase the things of the world. So you could say, if we take that frame and put it onto modern fighting, we can see how many fighters will exhibit moments of true transcendence, where they really do exhibit true warrior capacities. And we should remember, and this is very difficult for the modern to understand, but the true combat isn't about winning or losing. The true combat is about your soul transforming. So this is where you could say the heroic death comes from in European chivalry culture. That's where the great knight comes from. I'm sure we all know the image of the great knight, and even when we say the word knight, it has a distinction between the word that and soldier. We know the soldier's kind of more mercenary, does it for money. He's more employed by the state or a king. A knight, however, seems to have his own dimension of being. And the reason for that is because, again, he unites the path of the initiated warrior and the initiated priest. I may have spoken about this before on the channel, but if you look at any warrior tradition, a noble warrior tradition, it will have a spiritual element. The Buddhist monk Shaolin monks, sorry, what I'm looking for there. They're rooted in Buddhism, normally Zen, So it's that line between they're initiated as a warrior, but also as a spiritual form as well. Now, different thinkers throughout different times think one or the other should be dominant. Some think warrior should be dominant, some think spirit should be dominant. I'm more inclined that way. And some people also think both are united in the king, But for the interest of this video, what I'm really saying here is that idea of the spiritual warrior has largely been taken away. But we can still see it in its true fullness. And I don't mean to be mean to these fighters, because they're all incredible for getting in the ring, and it does take bravery. And very often they are putting their lives on the line. But you can see the differential here in what I'm talking to with a figure like Tyson Fury, on the one hand, famous boxer. You could say Conor McGregor fits into this mould as well, if you're more of a UFC fan. And on the flip side, you have someone like Oleksandr Usyk, who I'm a massive fan of, or Khabib Nurmagemedov, who I'm a big fan of in the UFC, and GSP too, although he's not actually a spiritual warrior in the true tradition, but I think he exhibits those qualities, as we'll get to. Now, you might already know that Fury and McGregor are the bigger names. And this really speaks to something that Evola would talk to with regards to that's the ethos of the age. It's materialism, it's braggadociousness, it's ego. So what appeals to the lower natures within us, the drama, the noise, the conflict? As I've said before, I sometimes click on TalkSport. Actually, I don't anymore because I can't bear it. But TalkSport is a radio station here in the UK that will cover the football news and so on. But they have a bit between their segments where they have an ad for their own station, and they'll say, this show between Simon Jordan and Jim White is engineered for confrontation. And you think, well, that's classic ego. It's classic lower self. You're thriving off the opposing dualities. And of course, this will trap us spiritually in a state of mental dualism. Now, that's not denying that the conflict is a part of manifest reality, or even that we won't have to engage in it as men. But it is saying that we're locked, if you like, in a lower spiritual dimension. And this ultimately is why Fury and McGregor are as big as they are, because they know how to use their mouth. They know how to create drama. But also, you might note with them as well, is both of them, while they might exhibit true solar warrior characteristics in the ring, I think perhaps most notably Fury getting up in the first Wilder fight, then going and smashing the hell out of him in the second. It was incredible warrior stuff, that. But when he's outside of the ring, he does have moments of higher self, but most of the time it does fall into, his lower self addictions, going out, getting wasted, hooking up with prostitutes, being very crude, using rude language. I don't want to be too dismissive of his mental health thing, but sort of buying into the modern ideology around mental health and using it as a kind of excuse as to why he is the way he is, rather than taking personal responsibility. The warrior initiation would not have time for that. It's like you've got to move into the depth of your soul, And then, of course, claiming these Christian values, but being extremely crude about someone like Usyk. And you can just see this lower self coming through. But that plays very well to this era, because this is the state of consciousness that we're in as a species right now. So we like that. Oh, it's drama. Did you hear what he said? But the counter case here is you can see someone like Usyk, and one of the reasons I'm so fond of Usyk is he really is a great example of, again, the priestly warrior. And this is an archetype that's almost disappeared in our modern era. As I say, I think Khabib and GSP exhibit elements of this too. Now, this doesn't mean Usyk is perfect, but one of the reasons he's so loved is because, he has complete mastery and bravery in the ring. You've got to be brave to get in a ring with a professional heavyweight. They can kill you. And you've got to put your ego aside and learn how to fight aside from your ego. Because if you go in swinging, you're going to pay. So why I think Usyk, though, exhibits this extra dimension is when you look at his personal life. There's this wonderful clip of him kissing the cross in between a ring after he'd had a bit of a battering, and kissing the cross, grinding down on his gum shield. And again, that's the initiated spiritual warrior. It's reliance on a higher force to guide you through, which can seem mad in this day and age. But again, through the initiatory language is completely natural. You're guided by something deeper, not in some faith type way, but in a practical way here and now. You let go of your own control to let the divine energy flow through you. Now, that will make you a better fighter because your mind will get out of the way. But number two, we can see he actually lives it. And that's one of the admirable things about Usyk. loyal to his wife, loyal to his nation, loyal to his tradition. And with it, a genuinely likable guy outside of it, and that he seems to just not really have an ego. He seems to embody restraint, discipline, even a sense of fun, a lightness about him. Before a fight, he's joking around and dancing in silly ways. And that's almost the ecstasy, the joy, if you like, of the spiritual side coming through. But maybe also takes a little bit of the seriousness out of the warrior, which can be actually quite healthy in a fight, because the warrior, when they get too lost in seriousness, can get lost in the mind again, trying to follow too many rules rather than flow. Again, I think we see this same dynamic in McGregor and Khabib. McGregor is just a paste and copy of Fury, or Fury is a paste and copy of McGregor. Again, both exhibit great showmanship in the ring and can exhibit high qualities outside of it. And this is why I think McGregor's getting into politics now. A risky game. Look, personally, I'd like to see him a bit more embedded in the spiritual initiation, because it's going to be hard to have that authority. It's going to fall into populism, most likely, because you need a deeper authority coming from the spirit to speak. But the point is, again, it's the same thing with McGregor, falling into lower self behaviours, punching people in pubs, getting wasted a lot, clear issues with drugs. That's not me judging the guy. I've had my challenges too. We've all had them. But these feel like things to come over before you're ready to lead, in my mind. Not saying he's not a great man or doesn't have the potential to be, but you can just sense there's a little bit of just uninitiated energy there. Whereas with Khabib, again, when he fought McGregor's way bigger than him, still is. But Khabib dominated him in the fight. But number two, he sort of won morally, because what he stood up for was honour, which is something that's gone from the modern era. Khabib was almost divinely angry with McGregor because he'd pushed against his sense of honour in his tradition, his relationship with his father, and what he viewed as what you could say something like noble values around what it means to fight, And you could see Khabib was genuinely upset and was almost fighting with that divine energy, And again, outside of the ring, we can see Khabib, it embodies what he's saying. He's not just saying it. He is genuinely a devout Muslim. He genuinely has gone back to Dagestan and trains his own community. He's with his people, if you like. He's the initiated warrior, or at least as initiated as he can be in this day and age, because we're somewhat limited with regards to our true transcendence. People can break through, but it's rare. I think it's also worth an honorary mention, GSP. He's not explicitly religious in the way that Usyk and Khabib are, but he has always exhibited an almost traditional devout observance to the martial arts themselves. That's again why he's very loved in that community. And again, he embodies the same energy as Usyk and Khabib outside the ring. Seems to be a genuinely good person at peace. And is genuinely embodying restraint, discipline, humility, all of these things. Now, the point I'm getting at here is, through a spiritual lens, Usyk, Khabib and GSP are actually more initiated, they're more advanced spiritually speaking, but they're not in terms of the world of commerce and drama and ego, which is the way that the day-to-day world functions in. And that again, through the Evolian frame, would tell us that this is where we're at in a state of consciousness right now, as human beings. We're just not in that era where we truly celebrate the real warrior. Whereas you can see Usyk, Khabib and GSP all exhibit night energy. Initiated man, initiated warrior, initiated priest. Add energies in both of them. Now, why am I saying all of this? Well, number one, it's so we understand the world around us, but number two, it's so we understand our own soul. Because the risk is, and I do worry about Fury a bit here, because he's done his battles in the ring and he's done very well, and I'm sure that's initiated into a great deal in some extent in the warrior and to an extent spiritually. Evola talks about that. You can be initiated somewhat spiritually even through action in combat. But what I'm more interested in drilling down on is he's going to have his battles now with himself. Once he retires, which some people say he already has, he might have this last big fight with AJ, but he's going to have to retire sooner or later, and then he's on his own with a stack of cash and no media around him anymore, no fighting, and he's got to find something to put that into. Now, some fighters put that energy into training other fighters, which again is an elder role. It's a spiritually advanced role, so he could do that. But he's so big, will he, literally and metaphorically, will he, want to do that? It might feel like he's taking a step down. It seems to me it's going to be a big spiritual challenge for him now. And I think this is worth us all being mindful of in our own lives about, well, where are we with both of these energies? I've said, openly, I'm a priest archetype by nature. I just am. You leave me on my own. I'm introspective. I'll meditate. I'll read. I'll think about things. When I listen to other people from other traditions, no matter if it's Islam, Christianity, non-duality, whatever, if they're talking to the truth, it just takes my soul. I feel like I'm at home. When it comes to the warrior side of life, I've never been a natural, and I had some early life trauma which really frightened me from it. Now, through a religious frame, you could say that's Satan trying to say, don't go here because he wants to weaken me. Just keep me in the spiritual, which is more of a feminine energy, Well, you're going to struggle with that. So I had to go into the warrior energy. And to be honest, I don't do it enough. I should do it more, especially when you have kids and you're busy with work. You don't have time to go to BJJ. But I have to. For the sake of my own soul and health. Because why I'm saying this is I'm not engaging enough with my warrior side. I'm never going to be an advanced warrior. I've come to peace with that. I wish I could be. There is a warrior switch in me, actually, which I have found deep down, and some experienced warriors are very good at drawing that out of you, especially when they're a good trainer. Don't trust all of them, by the way. Some of them are there for ego. Try and avoid them, and you'll find some good people, whether it's kickboxing or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or karate, or even just the gym. There are always good people there that can teach you, but you've got to look for the right ones. But the point I'm making here is we have to be conscious of how these energies are functioning within us. Because this isn't just an idea Evola is talking to, or I'm talking to, or anyone else is talking to. What we're talking to here are fundamental realities that work in the masculine soul. I was doing the coaching with the guys recently. We're doing the group work at the moment. We're speaking about initiation. Women are initiated by nature. They have the period, which gives them suffering and the reality of life. And then the second initiation for them, archetypally, is childbirth. Again, going through suffering to give birth to new life. And it makes them mature. It turns them into women. Men, we don't have that. We have puberty, but it doesn't exactly involve that much suffering. The suffering tends to come with the feminine. When we realize we're not good enough for a feminine, a woman. And again, there's a horrible experience when you're young, but you need to go through it to think, well, what do I need to do to grow, to improve? That's number one. Step number two then is, okay, you get the woman, but now you're too into her. Well, what needs to happen then is you need to be pulled away from the female force because you're getting addicted to a lower energy vibration, i.e. lust in the woman, rather than truly moving into your spiritual wholeness, which is the initiation as the male. Historically, that's what a tribal culture would do. Take the young boy away from the women of the tribe and take him into the woods, give him a set of challenges to overcome, and then he returns a man, or at least a male initiate, So again, we can't just recreate the age where these things are around. We're just not in that era. But we can look into our own lives now and say, well, what am I by my nature? Am I more priestly? Am I more warrior oriented? And celebrate that. Celebrate your nature. But also be mindful that you're not being completely lopsided. I mean, I'll always be lopsided in the priest energy. I just always will. That's why I have to focus more on the warrior energy. More consciously focus. Write down every week when I'm going to go to the gym, what I'm going to do to push myself a bit. And I'd recommend you do the same, because we need to have these things planned out and balanced in our lives as men. Otherwise, we're just going to be, to be blunt, top heavy in one direction or another. And we're going to fall into the temptations of the world. On the one side, if we're too warrior oriented, again, it's like Plato said many years ago, the scholar athlete is the ideal. The scholar alone is too effeminate, too soft, can be pushed around too easily. However, the athlete alone or the warrior alone can be too crude. It's almost like trying to run through a wall with your head and making a mess around you and getting in fights and all this sort of stuff. And the problem is you're not really maturing. So you need a bit of energy from both sides. And that's the true masculine initiation in the warrior priest dynamic, which again isn't some mystical thing out. Well, it is a mystical thing out there, but it's also a very simple thing inside of you. And we might not have the zeitgeist at the moment to truly fulfill that. And even a lot of the advice you get online from the Andrew Tates and stuff, he's having a go, but it's very much warrior oriented, and it feeds back into the lower self, money, cars, women, I'm the boss, aren't I great? This isn't really going to take you that far. It's a deeper journey than that. So we kind of have to go beyond what modernity is offering us. And we may be alone on this path. You know, a lot of fellas reach out to me and say, I feel alone. And I say, I understand, man, but it's part of the spiritual path a lot of the time. I'm here if you need, I'll help if I can, but it's part of the spiritual path. So I hope this helps somebody out there, and I hope you do implement these things in your life. If you do need any help from me, do reach out. I'm doing one-on-one coaching now, as well as the group coaching. May try to do that later in the year again. Do reach out to me if you're interested. Courses as well, a link down below that can introduce you into this lifestyle. 30 days of daily disciplines down there. Other than that, do join the Substack. Be nice to see you there. Come along to the free call tomorrow if you can. And other than that, do subscribe to this channel. Enjoy the rest of your day.